tarde. Boa noite. No. I regret that is the only Portuguese I will be able to use this afternoon, so I apologize for that. I'm working on it, and perhaps in the future I may up my vocabulary of Portuguese words to 10. It's probably about 5 words at the moment. So anyway, apologies, but let's get on. So, my name is Dave Peck. My organisation is called the Curriculum Foundation. We have the pleasure of working around the world to help ministries develop their national curricula. So what I hope to do, what I hope I have been doing, I hope I shall be able to continue to do, is to help with that process here in Brazil. So the title of my presentation this afternoon is The Future of High Schools in Brazil. But I'm going to talk more generally just to begin with, and I'll explain why. So, I'm going to talk about these things, and I'll move on to steps 2, 3, and 4 really are specifically focused upon high schools. But I want first to look at, say something about the national standards and about the bigger picture of curriculum design and curriculum principles. So that's where I shall begin. Okay. The national standards. First, the national standards. National standards are a great thing. You know, I understand that the press has not been that positive about the standards, but they're a major step forward from my perspective, and as I say, we work with a number of countries, and for a couple of particular reasons, well, 3 particular reasons I think I would say. Firstly, consistency across the whole country is really something enormous, isn't it? To say across the whole country, these are the standards we're working to, can only be a good thing. Okay? I hope we'd all agree with that. Yeah? And that means, of course, the second point there, that we have high expectations for everybody. And something else I would say about the way the national standards have been developed here in Brazil, very often countries don't go through a 3-stage process as you have. You've had 2 major consultations about the standards, and we're all looking forward to the 3rd version, the 3rd draft coming out soon, of course. But having had 2 consultations, that's 2 chances to improve. And the 2nd draft was much better than the 1st draft, and I'm sure the 3rd draft will be much better again. What it won't be, of course, is perfect. No country in the world has a perfect curriculum. None of our international experts who are here today would say their country has a perfect curriculum. And the curriculum development process is ongoing. So you'll have your 3rd draft. I'm sure it will be fit for purpose, and I look forward to that being implemented, and then to that process continuing with a further revision in a few years' time. A decision has to be made about when that will be. But that's it. We've used the term continuous improvement a number of times already, and that's what should happen with the curriculum. Through implementing it, the areas for improvement are identified, and the next round, the next revision, will improve on those. And another point I should make as well is, it's a rapidly changing world. No curriculum in the world can afford to stand still because the world's moving on. So, quite apart from having a pattern of review and revision every few years, there's a need to do that anyway. No matter, even if it was a perfect curriculum now, it won't be in 5 years' time because of this business of the world moving on so fast. So the third big thing about the new standards is progression from year to year, and at both stages so far that has been improved, and it's another big thing, isn't it? learners will clearly build on the learning year on year and make progress, which is excellent. So I do think that the standards have had a hard time in the press and should have been better received than they have, but let's hope that the third draft has everybody singing and dancing in the streets, or at least rejoicing. Your national data, of course, as the fourth point says, shows that we have big inconsistencies at the moment, and those inconsistencies, the national standards are a big part of addressing those, a really key tool for addressing those existing inconsistencies. So let's move on to the last point there, to what else needs to be done. Curriculum design and curriculum principles are often a starting point for us when we begin work with a new country on a new curriculum, of course. Perhaps that goes without saying. But I want to talk about that for a little bit. Now, the focus of our conference these 2 days is, of course, high schools. And that's right. We've had a really good day so far on the many issues that need to be addressed, and high schools will have plenty of room for improvement. So that's absolutely right. We have a focus on high schools. I think an underlying question, rather than an upfront question in what we've been saying, is that one: what are high schools for? And that's it's a very simple question to ask, isn't it? But it's a very complex question, and the answer is very complex. What we need in any curriculum, whether it's high schools or the whole school curriculum, is that second point there. It's curriculum aims. If we don't know what we're trying to achieve, how will we know when we've got there? Yeah? I'm not saying this applies to Brazil, but a famous comedian in the UK says, a famous quote from him was, we can't fail because we don't have a plan. Yeah? If we haven't got aims, if we don't know where we're going, we can't fail because we've got nothing to be measured against. So curriculum aims are really important, and the process of developing curriculum aims is something that has to be thought through and managed very carefully. So the focus of the standards, of the national standards, is of course subjects, but the curriculum is a much bigger thing, is a much wider thing than just subjects. And we've been touching on that in the various conversations that we've had today. So one of the things that we talk about, one of our focuses, is that last point there, the principles of a world-class curriculum. What do we mean by a world-class? What does a good curriculum look like? So what is a world-class curriculum? What are the principles that might apply to that? This is a vision that we use. It's a our curriculum foundation, that's our vision statement. And I'll read it. Every young person should leave school with the confidence, the ability, and the desire to make the world a better place. Now just imagine that. Wouldn't that be something? A vision is a vision, and we don't expect to get there necessarily, but we should keep working towards it, shouldn't we? What would the world be like if every young person did leave with the confidence, the ability, and the desire to make the world a better place? So, what is school for? What are the aims of school? Now, in an ideal world, we could use this as a workshop, and we could sit down in groups and start to think this through. And we could think, what is school for in terms of individuals, in terms of each individual learner, and what is school for in terms of the nation? What's school for as far as Brazil is concerned? We don't have time for a workshop, unfortunately, because we've got a lot to talk about. But here we go. Look, there are some suggestions. We're nowhere near. My slides are not matching up. There we go. So what I've got down there is a number of suggestions of what might be the purpose of schooling in terms of the individual. Now, I have a slight problem in that if I'm going to see my slides, you have to see the next one. So we'll have to shoot backwards and forwards. So there's a slight problem. I'm not sure we can get around that one, really. But I'll just keep whipping backwards and forwards between these slides and hope that's not a big problem for you. So, of course, if you ask anyone, they will say it's subject knowledge, wouldn't they? Yeah? The curriculum is about subject knowledge. And if you ask people who are not education professionals, very often they think that's what it is. The curriculum is subject knowledge, yeah? And it's nothing more. But it is more than that, and one of the focuses is, the second point, skills and competencies. If you ask employers, or if you read the publications of employer organizations, again, from any country around the world, they pretty much say the same thing, which is that school leavers today can't communicate, they can't solve problems, they can't work in teams, they can't think for themselves. You know, is that familiar in Brazil? Do employers say that here? They certainly say it, yeah, in many, many countries. So, yes, thank you. So the curriculum, you know, what sort of curriculum is it if we are not delivering subject learning and all those skills and competencies that our young people need? And then the third one on there, values and attitudes. Somebody talked earlier on today about not having any political education or not having enough political education in school. And that's very common, not just in Brazil. But, you know, would you agree that we should be, when in the curriculum, we should be addressing developing appropriate values and attitudes? We should be discussing these things with learners and helping them develop values and attitudes. It's not controversial, is it? Imagine how horrified we would be if a young man left school with no values and no morals and then got elected to the presidency of a major economy. You got there. Anyway, you take my point. Values and attitudes, really important. Now, something else that's key, another change in the last 20 years, 10 years, there used to be a mindset that young people could learn all they needed to learn when they were in school, and then they could get to the end of school, and that was the end of learning, and they could use that learning for the rest of their lives. It's not like that anymore, is it? What we need to do is develop people who will continue learning forever, for the rest of their lives. And that comes down to the same point I already made about a changing world. The world is changing so fast. If you did stop learning at the end of school and stop, you'd soon be left behind. You know, some of us with more mature years, might say we feel we have been a bit left behind by technology. We can't afford to, can we? We have to keep on learning. The third point from the bottom there about personal fulfillment, you know, every curriculum should, of course, be about personal fulfillment, shouldn't it? It's not just about learning for a job. You know, children should come home from school every day and be really keen to tell their parents what's been going on about the learning that's happened. I've told this story before. I'm not sure I've said it in Brazil, but a colleague of mine in the Institute of Education in London tells this story about his son. And he came home one day and said to his son, "What did you learn in school today, son?" And his son's 18, or, you know, anyway, near the end of schooling. "What did you learn today in school, son?" And he said, "Subjects, Dad, subjects." And wilted in front of him like that. As far as his son was concerned, an intelligent young man who went to university and so on, as far as his son was concerned, that's what school was. It was all these disjointed subjects that you just sort of did because you had to. there was no connection in the learning. There was no excitement in the learning. He didn't feel learning was about him. He felt it was about this sort of alien curriculum that he had to go through. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that way, should it? And last 2 points there. Contribution to society. Of course we want everyone to leave school, rather like what I said already, able to make a good contribution to society, don't we? And to be employed. But that's not the whole story. Okay. Now, we're in the same position. The needs of the nation, on the other hand, are many and various, of course, but there we go. One of the reasons for what's going on around the world, and there's a real tide of curriculum review happening in countries all over the world, and one of the reasons is that, or perhaps the principal reason, is that first one at the top there. No country in this world of the global market and global competitiveness can afford not to make use of the talents and abilities of every single young person in the country. We can't afford to have anyone wasted. We can't afford to have any dropouts, no matter who they are, boys, girls, people of all faiths, people of all ethnicities, people with disabilities. They've all got talents, and we need to use them all, and that's a real driver in the current process of curriculum review that is going on. We also need to make sure, and this really comes back to the high school message we've been talking about today, that our school leavers are equipped for all the possible opportunities that are out there. I was at a different conference yesterday doing a presentation to do with English, but just to give you a couple of quick examples that people gave me, I'm sure you could all tell me lots more, but one was Cabo Frio, yeah, where they claim to have the best beaches in Rio. Is that correct? Debatable. But anyway, the story I was told was that somebody doesn't agree at all. Definitely not the best beaches, but anyway, I'm a foreigner, I wouldn't know. But the story was that lots of hotels, those hotels require particular levels of English amongst their employees, and guess what? Guess who they're employing? Because they have the level of English required, mostly Haitians, because the local children, the level of English locally is not good enough. Shouldn't be happening, should it? If our curriculum is not delivering people with the skills for the local employment opportunities, it's not working. Another one was, is it Mackay? The petrol, yeah, Mackay, did I say it right? I'm surprised if I did. But anyway, where the same thing applies, they want a level of English, and they're not getting sufficient people with those levels of English, they're not employing the locals, because the school curriculum isn't delivering that level of English. And the other one was that they need people with particular technical English, because obviously there's a lot of technical language required in the petrol industry. So what they're having to do is when they do take people on, then have put on courses about technical English to do with the petroleum industry. Now, why would not? Again, ideally, our schools would be doing that, wouldn't they? In the locality, we've got that spare bit of curriculum. That's the kind of thing that could be happening. And lastly, on there, the bit about cohesive, productive communities. That's what we want, isn't it? School leavers should leave school and want to be part of this community, holding it all together, and so on. Okay, so my last question is, how much of this will be delivered by the standards? I've already said the standards are great. How much of this will the standards deliver? Well, you can see for yourselves, can't you? That subject standards deliver subject learning. a lot of what we've just been talking about there, standards can't deliver. So they're great, but they're not the whole answer by any means. Okay, so let's move on to here. That planning cycle will be familiar to all of you as professionals, of course, won't it? So in the curriculum planning process, we develop the aims, we plan the curriculum to deliver them, we deliver the curriculum, and then we evaluate it and revisit the aims and see whether we met the aims, see whether the aims are appropriate, and we move through the cycle again. So that's nothing new to you. So I've said it already, really. There is a real need, isn't there, for a conversation to be had about what are the aims of high school? In fact, what are the aims of school as a whole, of the whole education system? And then who should be involved in that conversation? At national level, at state level, municipality level, and at local level. The curriculum, the curriculum's not a particularly sexy subject, is it? You know? If you were to go into a bar and start to have a conversation about the curriculum with somebody, they probably would turn their back on you and talk to someone else about football. So it's not necessarily a sexy subject. But the curriculum really is everybody's, isn't it? It's not teachers. It doesn't belong to teachers. It doesn't belong to the education ministry. You know, I've said it already about children leaving school with the ability, the desire, etc. It's children, really, isn't it? So another part of that conversation is who should be involved in the conversation about what is school for. And the answer, really, I would suggest, is all stakeholders. Yeah? You can't leave anyone out. We can't have a curriculum that is something, we've had this alluded to already today as well, but we can't have a curriculum that is done to children. It should be done with them, shouldn't it? You know, young people, I don't know if they're all still here, but young people should really be not only learning the curriculum, but contributing to how it is learnt, and also helping teachers in the process. The best approach, in my opinion, is for teachers to make it quite clear that they are learners too, and to make that clear to children that they are learners too, that we're all in this together, we're all trying to improve, because this is not just Brazil, it's every country has this issue to some extent, that children are seen as empty vessels to be filled with the knowledge in the teacher's head. And the more we have that continuing, that mindset continuing, the slower progress will be. Okay, and I know I sound like a preacher sometimes, and I apologise, but it is really important, isn't it? Now look, this is a set of curriculum aims, and I've taken these from a lot of different countries, and I'm not saying they're right, and Brazil needs its own conversation about what are the curriculum aims, of course. You can't take a curriculum from one country and dump it into another and expect it to work. It wouldn't. You can't adopt someone else's curriculum aims, but you can use them to inspire. And there's some pretty good phrases in there, aren't there? You know, who wouldn't want school leavers to be confident? Self-directed learners, active contributors, concerned citizens. This sounds like a pretty good person already, doesn't it? A pretty good school leaver. Patriotic, responsible citizens, ready to play a full part in society, ready to take their place in the labour market, and so on. I won't go through and read all of those. Creative and innovative, though. Yeah? So, a conversation needs to be had about what the aims are and about how they should be developed. Now, I said it's not a sexy subject. If you say to people, what's the curriculum? I already said that for many, they would just say, well, it's all those subjects you have to learn, isn't it? It's actually much more than that, isn't it? Because every child's experience every day in school, they learn something. They learn something by the way they're treated when they walk in the morning. They learn something by the messages they're given. They learn something when they're all gathered together in an assembly. You know, the whole experience of school is about learning. The whole thing is the curriculum. And so it's it's that bit. It's the written curriculum, the first box, the expected learning, but that might also include all those other things, all those attitudes and values, all those skills and competencies. And then we plan the experiences through which we deliver all of those things. So that's important too. And many teachers struggle with that, by the way, with that question of what is the curriculum. I'm going to have to hurry up. Anyway, with the work we do when developing curricula around the world has a number of focuses. And I'm just going to quickly whip through these to see if they strike a chord. And the old curriculum, the old approach I just spoke about, of course, was teacher-centered, wasn't it? It's about the teacher and their knowledge, standing at the front and delivering the curriculum to children, delivering the learning to children. The new curriculum, what people are working towards, what countries are working towards, is, of course, a learner-centered curriculum. I could talk for hours about each one of these, and I mustn't do that. But what do we mean by a learner-centered curriculum? Well, it means the kinds of things we were hearing about, in other places. It means a curriculum where the teacher knows the learner very well and knows their strengths and weaknesses and knows what intervention is needed to help that learner improve. Yeah? It means getting learners working together so that they have opportunities to talk to each other, develop their oracy, develop their speaking, improve their speaking. I won't say more, but that's a really dramatic change and a real change in mindset, which is going on around the world, and you can't click your fingers and expect it to happen straight away. Moving from knowledge-based to competency-based, building in those competences and skills. We want children who can do, not just children who know. From passive learning to active learning. Working together in groups, not just sitting there and being told. How many people in this room have been in a classroom passive learning because the teacher's telling you, and actually your mind has been completely somewhere else, and your attention is possibly focused on how to look as if you're listening when you're not. How many of us have done that? Probably every single one of us, haven't we? Yeah, it shouldn't be happening, should it? That's no way to treat children. They're the ones who go home and say, the other thing you get, by the way, as a parent, I'm sure you know this, is, what did you do today at school? Nothing. Yeah? Do you get children who say nothing? Anyway, from being dependent on the teacher to being independent learners, another aspect of it. Learning for exams. I was a teacher, and I have to confess, a moment of confession, I sometimes said to students, you've only got to remember this for the next 3 weeks until the exam's finished, and then you can forget it. Now, I feel guilty, I admit that. It's a bit shameful, isn't it? We should never be saying that, should we? Every bit of learning that we do with young people should be learning for life. It should be so valuable that we want them to remember it forever. And we should never say those things. It's not about memorization, it's about understanding. It's not about shallow learning, it's about deep learning, which will stay with them, which is meaningful, which is useful. I've said this already, it's not about lots of diverse subjects, it's about connected learning. All that learning has connections, doesn't it? And some of those connections are the things we've just been talking about, actually, by the way, aren't they? The competencies and the skills. Critical thinking across the curriculum. Creativity across the curriculum. Involving music and the arts as well, for everybody. That experience should be there for everyone, shouldn't it? Okay? And it shouldn't be a lot of alien learning, it shouldn't be a lot of alien knowledge, a curriculum that people feel is nothing to do with them. It should be a curriculum that's full of relevant learning, where people say, oh yeah, I can see that matters to me. That's going to be important to my life. That links to, the employers in my area. That links to my family. So that's how the curriculum should look, isn't it? That's the new curriculum that we're working towards around the world. And then lastly, that point there, away from just subject learning to all of that key learning. Okay. He's a man I'm sure many of you recognise, and you can see who he is if you don't. But that's a quote that he made only last week, that the past was subject-based and the future needs to be project-based. It's not learn this about this subject, it's get on with this project. I'm not always happy with the word project, but learning linked to those skills and those competencies and those attitudes and those values and across subjects very often. That's the world we're moving to, and it's a big change for many people. But that mindset, that change of mindset is really important. Now look, one of the ways that we can do this, we can think about what we want for our young people. Again, it would be lovely if we had time for a workshop now, and I could get you into groups and we could do this exercise, but we haven't got time. But a useful exercise to do is this one, where you simply take a stick man, we call them, a school leaver. So that's a school leaver. What does that young person need if they're going to succeed in the 21st century? How would you describe that person who's really equipped for life? All right? And I'm not saying that this exercise should happen across Brazil. I'm just giving you an example of the way that it's one way in that we've used a lot of times in developing curricula. And if I did set you down, if I could set you that task in a workshop now, you would sit around and you would write all around that person various descriptions of a school leaver. You'd talk about it with your group and you would say, well, we want them to be like this, don't we? And you'd write a lot of descriptions around that person. And the answers, this is just a selection of answers, but we've done this in a lot of countries, in a lot of languages, and you won't be surprised to hear, I expect, that the answers are always pretty much the same. No matter where you go, we want the same thing for our learners. We want them to be confident, we want them to be healthy, independent, we want them to get on well with others, we want them to be compassionate, we want them to be curious, we want to believe that they are change agents, that they can make a difference to their own lives. When they leave school, I've been empowered through my learning, I can make a difference to my own life, I can make a difference to my community. All right? So it's a really useful exercise, and there's a next step as well, by the way, which you can do, having done that first part, which is to just look at each of the descriptions and to say, well, which of these are sort of about the beliefs? Which of these go to the heart? Yeah? Which of them are really about the brain? Generating ideas, that's thinking, isn't it? That's a mental process. Which of them go to the hands? Which of them are skills, things that people do? So you can not only do the exercise to identify what you want the person to look like, you can then go the next step and categorize these things, and that helps you get to a point where you're beginning to work towards a set of aims and a set of competencies and so on that you want young people to have. And some of them, by the way, like creative, it's about the brain and the heart and the hands. So some of them cross all of those, fit into all of those categories. So having done that, you arrive at the elements of the curriculum, the aims, values, principles, competencies, heritage and culture. Right, I'm going to hurry on now. I'm just going to say this very quickly. The world-class curriculum is available on our website. We have 4 curriculum domains, and you can see them there. And within those 4 domains, there are 10 principles. And so in the first domain, there are 2 principles. In the next domain, there are 3 principles. And the third domain, 3 more principles. And the last domain, there are 2. I won't read them through because there just isn't time, and I haven't got onto high schools yet, and I've got so much to do. But a lot of people have used the world-class curriculum principles as an evaluation tool for their own curriculum, whether at school level or at national level. It's a useful way to get people talking and thinking, does our curriculum do this? Does it do that? All right? And arriving at a point where you can produce an action plan or a development plan to say, well, what do we need to do to the curriculum to make sure it delivers this on this particular principle? So I'm rushing through that, but I'm afraid I must. So we reach a point where we say, okay, we've got subject knowledge, values, attitudes, culture and heritage, competencies and skills, and through these things, if we offer all of these things in the curriculum, then it will deliver all of those descriptions, all of those aims of producing good citizens, lifelong learners, people who are creative and confident and productive, environmentally aware. You get the picture. Okay. Let me hurry on. The world-class curriculum principles there's an audit, as I've said already, which has been translated into Portuguese, and there are some copies of it available. I know Instituto Unibanco have printed out some copies of it, but if you want to, you can go onto our website and find them. And there's also copies of this. This is a study I did for the Lemon Foundation on behalf of the Movimento pela Base to help with the thinking around the high schools. So the copies of that are available as well, I understand, on the table, wherever the table is. Right, so let's hurry on now. This was a number of comparator countries chosen for reasons which are listed there, and I won't go into the reasons. That's not particularly important. Okay, so first point was to look at pathways. So what kind of high school system do we want? What pathways do we want to offer? And that's where we are, isn't it, at the moment? We have a single pathway, 13 subjects, up to the end, and sadly, we also have that going on. We have dropouts. We have those for whom this pathway doesn't seem to be appropriate, who drop out. Okay? What do we want? Well, what we've been talking about is a system where there's more than one pathway. And that's very much in line with the agenda all around the world. One pathway is not going to deliver the kind of young person that we've just been talking about. So we need to think more carefully about what pathways we do need if we are going to deliver a person with all those skills and abilities and knowledge that we've just been mentioning. A really key thing, a really key aspect of developing those pathways is that there should be transferability between them. You can't expect children to pick up a pathway at whatever age and they have, having made that choice, they are stuck with it. That's not good enough, is it? We need them to be able to switch pathways at certain points, so that would be a stipulation. And what we don't want is dropouts. What we do want is for anyone for whom the pathway is not appropriate, so anyone who moves out of the pathway earlier is going to employment, or employment and training, that should really say. It should be there should never be someone who fails and drops out. There should be no casualties of the system, should there? What there should be is people who make purposeful decisions to go in a particular direction, to do something that they want to do and that is useful and appropriate. Okay. And another thing I would say about this is that these pathways, we have to get out of the mindset of saying that higher education is academic higher education, and that's all there is. We need vocational higher education as well. I've given this example to some people already, but you want Brazilian engineers who are graduates and are qualified to the very highest level, who will take charge of engineering projects in Brazil, don't you? And I could say the same thing about a whole range of vocations. So we shouldn't be thinking of higher education as just for academics. And of course, we should have people moving to going right to the end and not going to higher education, moving to employment, not because they fail the exam, but because they want to take up employment at age 18 or whatever it is when they finish the pathways. Okay. Now, big question, if you're planning pathways, is how many pathways are you going to have? So there's one pathway at the top there, and each pathway would be the same in that it would have some common core subjects and it would have some specialist subjects related to the pathway, delivering whatever we want out of that pathway. I've just put a couple of points about the kinds of pathways that exist in schools in different countries. The first bullet point won't surprise you at all, because those are the sort of traditional academic pathways, the arts and the sciences, the humanities, the languages. That's not controversial at all. The next lot I've called the 90s and the noughties pathways. So the last 10 years, 20 years, perhaps a bit more than that, but many schools around the world have said, well, what can we do by way of vocational courses? Well, we can do those kinds of things. Business studies, sort of classroom-based subjects with a different, a vocational focus to the learning, but not requiring any great amount of specialist equipment that a school wouldn't have. So business, ICT, media, social care, sport and leisure. Schools have sport and leisure equipment usually, facilities, catering. And then the other vocational pathways, those that are heavy in the use of specialist resources or plant equipment, facilities, such as construction, engineering, nursing, hairdressing. So what pathways do we want? Which can schools deliver? How are we going to deliver the others? And the bit at the bottom there about the specialist subjects, there are a lot of issues to be thought about, again, which I must deal with fairly quickly. So what can schools offer? We've already talked about earlier on the issue around large schools and small schools. Small high schools just do not have the chance, do they? They don't have enough children to be able to offer a vast array of pathways. So what do you do about that? There's the rural and urban divide. In many urban areas, one solution that many countries have found is to simply say, right, we've got a group of 10 high schools here. Well, that one's the specialist in those subjects, that one's the specialist in those subjects. In an urban area, that is feasible, isn't it? In rural areas, it's much, much more difficult. And then you think about, having to move children to a long distance on a daily basis, or to have boarding facilities so that there are weekly boarders in specialist schools. But if these are really difficult issues to tackle, but if we really mean it, if we really want these opportunities for all our young people, of course they have to be tackled. Again, something which has been mentioned, but this issue, the next question, what subjects can be offered by other providers? Where can schools say, well, we can do this, we can do the classroom bit, but who can help us with the bricklaying? Where can they go to do the bricklaying? What sort of, and so on and so on. I could say that for many other examples of vocational pathways. And it could be specialist training facilities, it could be employers, it could be apprenticeships, which are, really can be very, very powerful. The question of the options and electives, one pitfall that I've come across many times is simply that countries say, well, we'd like to do it this way, but actually we've only got these resources, so the schools just offer whatever they can. And you can guess what happens there, can't you? You end up with a lot of schools all offering the same thing that's easy to offer, and you don't end up with the whole map being covered. And there's an implication there, isn't there, of somebody at a higher level having to take control, having to sort of direct schools in the options that they are allowed to offer, so you do have that whole spectrum covered. And the last bullet point is also really important. If you're going to have electives, you have to have a system by which children can choose the electives that they want to do. And that's easily said, but not so easily done. You have to have a system by which you do that. And then timing is another big question too. If you've got 3 years of high school, would you want them to start their electives, start their different pathways as soon as they begin grade 10? Right? If so, where do they get the guidance to make the right choice? Are you going to train up those people in the primary schools to offer that guidance? Or do you say they just do it in the last 2 years of high school, and they have, in the high school, there are the specialists delivering those courses, so they can offer the guidance? Again, I'm not saying either is right, but that's a real big issue that has to be considered carefully, isn't it? You can't just click your fingers and people have made a choice, unless you want them to make the wrong choice. Okay, so let's hurry on. So that was pathways. This, by the way, is just a look at the pattern across those comparator countries with respect to the percentage of elective subjects that people study, or percentage of time allocated to elective subjects, and the range of practice with respect to how many subjects are on offer. And I'll say this now, Finland is wrong, because, very quickly, in doing this, almost all countries are reviewing their curriculum. And rather than for every country put in where they are now and where they're trying to get to, I made a choice. And what I did with Finland was to put where they were going to, but then they made a U-turn and went back to 18 subjects. So there we are. Anyway, you can see the cross-section. So Brazil is very low in terms of the percentage of time allocated to elective subjects and percentage of students following elective subjects at the moment. And clearly the changes we're talking about would address that. And ditto, Brazil is in the upper end of the spectrum in terms of the number of subjects on offer. And you know, it's not for me to say, it's for these conversations to take place and decisions to be made accordingly. But personally, I really can't see why you would want to study 13 subjects in all 3 years of high school. You could do 13 subjects with the kind of option or modular approach that we've just been talking about in Finland, for example, couldn't you? Where they study one of those 13 subjects for just 1 year. But I really can't see why you would want to study all 13 all the way through. You know, that is a recipe for subjects, dads, subjects, isn't it? Yeah? Okay, so hurrying on again. Decisions about core and elective subjects that need to be taken. There we go. We've got the same problem again that I can't see it. Right. There we go. Do them one at a time. So, decisions that need to be made. The requirement for there to be a common core, no dispute. There is a common core. We want there to be one. The size of the common core is another question that does have to be thought about. The subjects in the common core, which are going to be examined and which are not going to be examined. You don't have to examine everything, do you? It doesn't all have to be in the tests. What is the point in testing everything? The percentage of time devoted to each common core subject, and then the time span of the core throughout all grades, or limited to some grades. You could have a common core for just grade 10, couldn't you? And then you could go into electives, again, in common with some other examples we've been hearing about today. Okay? So, and then decisions about the elective curriculum, and I'm afraid that when I click on, oh no, we're back on track. So, time devoted to elective subjects, optional subjects, the range of subjects, the academic subjects that are elective subjects, right? That allow people to go on and study science at university or maths at university and so on. So they could be doing more maths, couldn't they? More science in the electives. And then the additional subjects, the vocational subjects that we want to include. Big decisions, can't be made very quickly. And then the percentage of time devoted to each one of those. So big decisions. One of my concerns, one thing that needs to be thought about is, if we delay the implementation of the common core in high schools, while we think about the future of high schools, some of the decisions that need to be made are so big that they will take a long time. And what you wouldn't want to do is to spend 3 years or 5 years addressing all these big questions about the future of high schools and still not introduce the common core. Children should be benefiting from that as soon as possible, shouldn't they? So just that's, again, a bit of an aside, but let's move on. Right, diversity of students was the third of the points that were in, I'm sure you all remember, the Instituto Unibanco study earlier on, so I'll just say something about that. So inclusion, I'm sure you use that phrase in Brazil, in Portuguese, and making the best use of the abilities and talents of every learner. We've seen that already, but there we go. Some of the most difficult things to change are mindsets, aren't they? Are people's mindsets. And this is a phrase that Oh dear, we're right out of sync again now. Don't know how we've done that. Right. Don't know if we can get it back on track. But the traditional mindset that has existed around the world, and I've just used this phrase that has been used in the UK. You probably don't use it in Portuguese. It probably makes no sense in Portuguese, or maybe any other language. But in England, that phrase has been used for a long time, that it's about sorting the sheep from the goats. Yeah, the curriculum is for sorting the sheep from the goats, and you sort them out, and then the sheep can do this, and then the goats go off and do something else. You know, that has been a mindset that has existed, and we can't have. It's not like that, is it? That's not the way the curriculum ought to be. And then, looking at the other side there, the modern mindset is that we haven't got any sheep or goats. What we have is a broad spectrum of people with a whole range of abilities, and they all deserve the chance to succeed, don't they? Yeah? That's what our curriculum is for. That's how it needs to be. And school's role is to do that. It's to steer each individual along a pathway to enable them to succeed. Right? And I think Richard dealt with this very well earlier. You know, it's not about making it easier. I've had a few comments, including in press interviews, from people saying, you know, is it about increasing inequality? Well, of course it isn't. You know, what could be more unequal than a system where you have people dropping out without the qualifications to achieve anything? It's about producing appropriate pathways that allow people to succeed. And lastly, let's just say something quickly about assessment. We can't think about curriculum review without at the same time thinking about assessment, of course. An assessment is, as that says, critical in validating the learning that takes place in high schools, providing evidence that school leavers have achieved those standards, those high expectations that we want of them. So we can't do one without the other. So what we need then is, of course, as they move along that pathway towards higher education, there will be an assessment at the end for you know, you do need to check that people are suitably qualified to enter higher education, but there should also be other assessments for other qualifications that people can succeed in. All right? And if we have if the first assessment is the only one that matters, you know, if in teachers' minds, if in parents' minds, the only thing that matters is that assessment at the end of high school to see whether they can get into higher education, then high schools just can't serve the majority of the population. So that's another big task, isn't it, to win people's minds around, to make sure people understand that all of these assessments are important and they all are purposeful and all help children get somewhere. So a lot of decisions about assessment there. Key features of an assessment system that will really support the curriculum and assure everyone can succeed at something appropriate and challenging and worthwhile. A decision about how many levels of achievement should be recognised. These all need to be comparable, don't they, in some way? All these levels of achievement need to be comparable. How will standards and comparability be assured? And there's a question, do we need a national qualifications framework? And I'm just going to say something about that before I finish. And the last question there is, again, another key one. What should the balance be between teacher assessment and examinations? And I don't think this is a mistake that Brazil is likely to make, actually, but many countries do make the mistake of thinking that it's all about exams, and they put in exams at the end of every year or even the end of every term, and children sit so many exams that the time they spend revising for exams, the time they spend sitting exams, is all lost learning time. So, you know, another really important question that needs to be considered. So, National Qualifications Framework, we don't need to read all the words on there, but just note that it's pretty much a norm that there is a national qualifications framework across those comparator countries where, you know, they say, well, this qualification is at that level, it's worth that much, this qualification is at that level, so that all of the qualifications are set out in a framework and everyone can see exactly the value attributed to each qualification that they undertake. So I shan't dwell on that because I'm out of time, And we have those, my last point is this one. Learners with special educational needs are a really important group, aren't they? And the whole curriculum should be about excellence and equity. I won't list all the groups that I spoke about just now, but it's about excellence and equity for everybody, including those with special educational needs, the abilities and talents of every learner. And that's a challenge to make the curriculum accessible to people with all of those educational needs. And it means changing, it means resources, it means infrastructure, it means training, it means in-school support. But this is absolutely key. In every country in the world, there are extremely talented people who don't achieve as they should because of hearing impairment or, a physical disability or whatever. So that's another big issue. Someone we always mention, I don't know if you recognise him, but someone in the UK. Anyone recognise him? Yeah, okay, a lot do. Yeah, Professor Stephen Hawking, motor neurone disease, can hardly move any parts of his body, one of the most famous physicists in the world. People with disabilities can achieve at the highest level, can't they? So that's that last point. So some next steps, there they are. There need to be discussions relating to all of these things, curriculum aims, what should be in the curriculum as well as the subject standards, skills and competencies, all those things we mentioned earlier on, what curriculum pathways should there be, what core and elective subjects there need to be. And I'm sure many of you are already aware of how big this agenda is for high schools. Fully inclusive curriculum, how do you produce a fully inclusive curriculum? A roadmap for implementation, that's so important, isn't it? Without a roadmap for implementation with key milestones and dates by which we will achieve this and so on, it doesn't happen. So that's another key thing that has to happen very soon, or as soon as possible. And then, I mentioned it earlier, but what is the most appropriate level for these discussions to take place so that all the stakeholders are involved and everyone owns these changes and nobody can say, you're doing this to us. Everyone has to say, we're all doing this together. So, there we are. Thank you for your attention. It's a big agenda. Last thing I would say is, it's a big agenda. It can be daunting. When you have something very daunting to do, very frightening to do, it's an old cliche, and apologies for that, but a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a small step, doesn't it? So we mustn't get stuck and sit still and say, oh no, we've got to, we can't do it yet. We must take those small steps and get moving. Right, thank you very much.
Vamos lá. Uma pergunta da plateia. É correta a visão de que o currículo é um instrumento intencional que reproduz as intenções políticas de um sistema?
That's a very good question. Now, this is one of the dangers. It's one of the issues that causes more trouble to curriculum developers than anything else. And it's not just Brazil, it's not just the UK, but this does happen that governments change and new governments want to throw out the curriculum that was put in by the last government. The very best systems have one of two features. The ideal is that political parties agree that the curriculum is above politics and that what they will each do is work to improve the curriculum and continue that continuous improvement process that we've spoken about. The other is happy coincidence, and again, like they've got in Finland, where you have a coalition government who no one party is responsible for the curriculum, so no new balance says, oh, it was their fault, we're going to change it. So what we really need is for politics not to interfere, but sadly, it's much easier for, well, we can say that, so it doesn't mean that it won't happen. But I'll come back to something I've said already. If curriculum developers, if ministries are careful to ensure that curriculum is developed consulting all stakeholders, all stakeholders, and that means across the whole political spectrum, then it is owned by everybody. And a curriculum can become something which the whole nation is proud of. Look, somebody earlier on mentioned Sudan. That is the curriculum framework of South Sudan, the poorest country in the world. A lot of their schools have been burned down or occupied by militias, but they have a curriculum framework, and that framework is something which everyone is proud of. And I can't believe for a minute, even if whatever political changes are, that will be thrown out. So that sets out the subjects, which subjects are studied when, what competencies are learned, what skills, what attitudes, what values. The real challenge is to try to make sure that the whole population is consulted and involved in developing the curriculum so it becomes something owned by the nation and not owned by any one political party. Much easier for me to say it than to do it, but that's how we'd all like to be.
Obrigado. Não esqueça o seu. Uma pergunta aqui sobre... A gente viu mais cedo vários, e o senhor mostrou também alguns exemplos de modelos em que há, pelo menos em parte do sistema, uma associação mais próxima com o mundo do trabalho já no ensino médio. Pergunta relacionada a isso: se houver associação de escolas com formação voltada para o trabalho, para o emprego, qual a garantia de que os estudantes não serão usados como mão de obra barata pelas empresas, assim como são os estagiários vindos das universidades?
Yeah, and again, this is a really difficult question, as they all are, and so they should be. It's a really difficult area. Developing a curriculum is not something that's ever going to be easy. What we'd all like to do is get to a situation like the one that Bernd described earlier about Germany, where every pathway is respected, and no one's going to say, well, that's vocational, that's worth less. And that's a mindset that takes years and years to change, in fact, probably decades to change, but it is something that we need to work on. And no, we can't guarantee it, of course not, because employers will try to get workers as cheaply as they can. That's their business, they're there to make money. But partnership with employers is really important, ensuring that the kinds of partnerships with schools whereby they can get on-the-job training at the same time as learning means that employers get young people whose skills they really appreciate and really need, and the incentive then is to pay the market rate, isn't it? Because it's not someone who you can exploit quite so easily. But there can't be a guarantee, but we can certainly do all we can to try and mitigate it. There is a big role for politicians, isn't there?
Agora que a gente discute a reforma do ensino médio no Brasil, há um receio de uma parcela, pelo menos dos educadores, de que quando aquele caminho único que a gente está acostumado no Brasil, que é diferente da maioria das experiências mostradas agora, mas considerando o caso brasileiro, onde os alunos chegam ao ensino médio com um nível muito mais baixo de qualificação, considerando o histórico de desigualdade no Brasil, há um receio de uma parcela dos educadores de que uma flexibilização do sistema vá agravar as desigualdades que já existem no sistema. Eu queria que o senhor falasse um pouco mais sobre isso, dessa visão de como que é possível construir caminhos flexíveis sem agravar desigualdades.
Well, if I deal with the first thing you mentioned first, which is the bit about learners coming through with a low level of achievement when they get to high school, let's not forget that we now have national standards with high expectations being implemented. Now, I'll be very surprised if they don't have an impact. So hopefully we're going to find that learners as they reach high school are more highly qualified than they ever were. The issue around increasing inequality, there are lots of aspects to this, and we haven't got time to talk it through in detail. But one of them is, and I mentioned already, what could be more unequal than having a system where of a high percentage of people are either incapable or not motivated to get to the end of the pathway and they drop out. That's built-in inequality, isn't it? So we ought to be able to improve on that. Another aspect is that it is not always appropriate to, necessarily increasing the percentage of people who get through the single pathway to higher education is not necessarily a good thing. And I'll give you an example. We were doing some work in Morocco, and there were massive demonstrations every day outside the ministry, and these were demonstrations of young people who had gone through the pathway, they'd had their higher education, their academic higher education, they'd come out qualified with degrees in geography and philosophy and sciences and so on, and they hadn't got jobs because they weren't jobs. No country is ever going to get to a point where all the jobs that there are require degrees. I don't mean we shouldn't aspire to degrees, but you can have too much of it if you're equipping people, qualifying people to do something that there isn't a job in. So, I can't give you an answer. I can't say this is the way to do it, but we have to consider all of these issues when planning the way forward.
Obrigado, professor. Acho que hoje o dia já foi bastante intenso e amanhã vamos ter mais um dia intenso a partir das 8 horas da manhã. Começa aqui com um café de boas-vindas e muito obrigado, professor. Obrigado a todos que permaneceram aqui.